Is human happiness just an illusion born of ignorance? I know it's a super heavy question to kick things off with, right? But honestly, it's exactly the kind of provocative philosophical claim we are going to unpack today. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving deep into a really fascinating and, quite frankly, controversial source document. It's a text that completely challenges conventional science and philosophy, literally arguing that what you and I call joy might actually just be a total lack of awareness about the universe around us. The text we're exploring today is built around one massive, central premise. The author argues that the universe is definitely not the product of random chance, chaos, or some cosmic accident. Instead, they claim it's entirely governed by the supreme intelligence of what they call the greatest creator. Now, whether you want to look at this through the lens of theology, philosophy, or just sheer intellectual curiosity, the way this source meticulously pieces together its argument is incredibly structured and totally worth digging into. To make this case, the author organizes this concept of supreme intelligence into three distinct pillars. Number 1, universal order. Number 2, the blueprint of life. And number 3, wisdom and foresight. So let's jump right into Pillar 1, establishing the order of the universe. The text argues that the very first proof of this supreme intelligence is the incredibly orchestrated order found across three completely different scales of reality. First up, you have the macroscopic level. Think massive, sweeping motions of spiral galaxies, the Milky Way, stellar systems, all operating in perfect synchronization. Then the author zooms us all the way into the microscopic level. We're talking about the exact structured, predictable movements of molecules, atoms, and quarks. But then the third point is where the text introduces a totally spiritual element, the cycle of life. The author essentially argues that just like gravity or atomic structures, reincarnation itself is a strictly governed, orderly system. According to the text, this cycle of life operates on a very strict timeline based on a person's spirituality. It's almost like a ladder. If your spirituality rises, you can ascend from a human to a celestial being, or even a Buddha. But on the flip side, if it declines, the text explicitly states a human could be reincarnated as an animal or even a plant. The crucial takeaway the author is pushing here is that spiritual mobility isn't random. It's just as governed by universal laws as the orbits of physical planets.
All right, moving right along to Pillar 2, designing the structure of life.
This is where the source shifts gears entirely. We're moving away from cosmology and spiritual reincarnation and diving straight into a highly unique interpretation of genetics. To explain how genes work, the text uses this really vivid metaphor. It says genes are like unexposed photographic negatives that get copied over and over again. And just as you absolutely cannot use a photographic negative of a rose to print a picture of a pig, no matter how hard you try, the text argues that the negatives for different forms of life are completely distinct and were deliberately designed by this greatest creator.
So, you might be wondering, how do these biological negatives actually interact? Well, the author establishes a very strict binary rule here: genetic compatibility versus genetic repulsion. Compatible genes exist within the exact same type of life. So, for example, humans of different racial groups can easily intermarry and reproduce. But repulsive genes exist between completely different types. The text insists that humans, animals, and plants have mutually repulsive genes, which makes it fundamentally impossible for them to ever crossbreed and create viable, ongoing life.
Now, the author does acknowledge that some life forms appear somewhat similar, but they insist these forms remain fundamentally walled off from one another. To back this up, they point to a few specific examples. For instance, a horse and a donkey can reproduce to create a mule, or grafted apple and pear trees can produce an apple pear, even a hypothetical pairing of a human and an ape resulting in a wild man. But here is the kicker the author focuses on. In every single one of these instances, the resulting offspring is completely sterile. Their seeds just cannot reproduce. The author uses this biological dead end as absolute proof of rigid, impenetrable genetic walls. And because of those rigid genetic walls, this source makes this incredibly definitive statement. Humans did not evolve from monkeys, nor can we say that monkeys degenerated from humans. The text entirely rejects mainstream evolutionary theory across the board. It relies heavily on the argument that genetic structures are closed off, pre-designed systems that simply do not gradually morph into one another over long periods of time. To really hammer this point home, the author uses this striking quote. They say, "Evolutionists claim that humans evolved from monkeys. This is like saying that airplanes evolved from buildings, and buildings evolved from Swiss mechanical watches. It's an extreme, almost absurd mechanical comparison, but it perfectly captures exactly how the author views biology. To them, a monkey and a human are as fundamentally different in their engineered blueprints as a wristwatch is to a towering skyscraper. The author actually expands on this architectural blueprint metaphor to explain physical growth, too. Think about it. Human hair grows continuously, right? But our eyebrows and our eyelashes conveniently stop at a certain length so they don't block our vision. Why is that? Well, the text argues it's because it's strictly pre-designed. If an architect draws up a blueprint for a 5-story building, the construction workers can't just randomly decide to build a 6th floor. In the exact same way, the source argues that biological growth operates on a strict, pre-calculated blueprint. It's a failsafe to ensure that our heart doesn't suffocate before our blood vessels form, preventing us from becoming biological monsters.
Which brings us to our third and final section, Pillar 3, Knowing the Past and the Future. Having established this idea of strict physical and biological order, the text then defines true wisdom, and it defines it strictly as the ability to predict the future based on universal laws. The author cites several examples here. They point to Chairman Mao Zedong claiming he accurately predicted over 20 future events. They highlight the ancient strategist Zhuge Liang, who could supposedly perceive the exact timing of changes to win battles. And they even point to modern scientists who can mathematically predict solar eclipses centuries in advance. The core thesis here is simple. Because the universe operates on strict mechanical cause and effect, having higher wisdom literally just means having better prediction skills. But there are limits, strict limits. The author maps out a hierarchy of wisdom, and unfortunately for us, humans are right at the bottom. Due to our genetic structure, our knowledge is forever capped. The author actually compares human understanding to trying to find the end of pi. We just physically can't do it. Above us are gods and demons who know most things. Then come Buddhas who know human pasts and futures. And finally, sitting at the very top is the greatest creator, who knows absolutely all cause and effect across the entire universe. And that leads to a rather dark conclusion, the burden of true knowledge. Now, you'd probably think reaching the absolute top of that wisdom hierarchy would be the ultimate goal, right? Well, not exactly. The author warns of a surprisingly fatalistic consequence here. If a human were to actually attain the ultimate wisdom of gods and Buddhas, ordinary earthly life completely loses its meaning. As the text flatly states, you would no longer seek survival, you would actually begin to seek death. The argument goes that once you fully comprehend the mechanical, inescapable laws of cause and effect governing absolutely everything, the mundane struggles and the little joys of human survival become entirely hollow. And to drive this home, the author leaves us with this incredibly powerful, really haunting metaphor. Human life is a tragedy, like seeing a deer happily bouncing about while surrounded by wolves, insects, tigers, and leopards. It's quite an image. The deer is joyful, but only because it's completely naive to the predators lurking right there in the shadows. The author is literally suggesting that everything we consider happiness or joy is merely the bliss of that ignorant deer. If we truly had ultimate wisdom, if we could actually see all the dangers and the absolute laws of the universe, well, that naive happiness would vanish in an instant. So that brings us right back to where we started, leaving us with one heck of a question to ponder. Based on the incredible worldview mapped out in this text, from those macroscopic galaxies sweeping through space down to the rigid blueprints of our genes, all the way to the incredibly heavy burden of predicting the future, is ultimate wisdom truly a gift, or is it actually a curse? It is a fascinating question derived from a highly structured and definitely provocative piece of writing. Thank you so much for joining me in breaking this text down today. Keep questioning things, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.